Hello, welcome. Today we are going to talk about salary negotiation. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will feel very comfortable knowing the process for negotiating a salary. So to get started, before we are able to negotiate a salary, we have to do our homework. Because before we're able to go to an employer and say, hey, I feel like I expect to be paid this amount of money, we have to understand what this amount of money reasonably can be. So some of the things to think about while doing your homework is number one, try to find some general salary information. So what do people who typically work in your field make? Glassdoor.com, salaries.com, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is bls.gov, are all good websites to go find general salary information. Once you've found general salary information, then you need to consider geographical salary information. Depending on where you choose to live in the United States or abroad, salaries could vary very differently. So for example, what may be fair to pay somebody in Warrensburg, Missouri may not be fair to pay somebody in Los Angeles, California. A really good resource for figuring out what is an appropriate geographical pay is bestplaces.net. And in bestplaces.net, you're able to put in your current zip code and the level of pay that you would expect, and then put in the zip code to the places that you're thinking about relocating to and seeing what an average salary would look like in those areas. And then finally, in addition to thinking about your field, you also need to think about your industry. So for example, a marketing major who is a social media manager for a nonprofit organization would probably be paid very differently than a marketing major who's a social media manager for a software company. So your field, your geographic location, and your industry are all indicators or all pieces of information that you need to seek in order to find out what a fair salary might be. So once you have done your research, we're getting ready to work on this equation. And so this equation says, as you can see, your ISN market values are equal to your ORV plus your IV plus your RF dollars plus your bennies and perks. So essentially what this means is that we have to take all of these different factors into play to come up with our desired market value. The ISN market value. This is actually a representation of three different numbers. Your ideal salary, which is the I, your satisfactory salary, which is the S, and then your no-go salary, which is the N. And all of these three numbers are really important. When we think about your ideal market value, you think about, okay, in a best case scenario, if somebody was going to pay me exactly the amount of money that's a best case scenario for somebody like me, obviously the amount of money that I think I'm worth, that's going to be my ideal value. The S value is our satisfactory value, and so this may be a slightly more realistic representation of the money we expect to make. What would be a satisfactory amount of money for me to make? And then finally, the N is your no-go value. And the no-go value is the value that, hey, you know what, no matter how great this job is, no matter how cool this company is, I need to make at least X number of dollars because I still have to buy my ramen and I still have to pay my rent, right? So the N market value is the number that you absolutely don't want to go under when somebody makes you a salary offer. So in order to figure out our ideal, our satisfactory, and our no-go ranges, we use the following equation. First, we take our objectively researched value, or our ORV, and that's the value from the previous slide. When we think about doing our homework and considering the geography and looking at our specific field and industry, that should tell us what our objectively researched value is. Then to that objectively researched value, we either need to add or subtract individual value. So individual value is the things that we are bringing to the table above and beyond what the job requires of us. So maybe you've worked with an organization for 5 or 6 different years. Maybe you've been, let's say, a cashier at Target for 5 years, and now you're getting ready to graduate, and so you want to look at working in the Target corporate headquarters. Well, because you've already been associated with Target and you've already been trained by Target and you already know the culture and you already know some of the softwares, then you would have some additional individual value. You would be a better fit for the Target organization than somebody who had no affiliation with the Target organization. Or, for example, maybe you're an accounting major and you're applying for a job at a very small accounting firm. And through the interview process, they say, hey, look, we're also looking for somebody to manage our social media. Well, You're not a marketing major, but you're also not 65, right? So you might be the right person to also do some updating on their Facebook and their Instagram pages. That would be additional individual value. Individual value can also be a number that we subtract. So maybe we are looking to break into a field that we're not yet quite qualified for, or we don't have as much experience as other applicants will. In that case, we would want to subtract our individual value. So we know what the market rate is for these professionals, but knowing that we don't quite have the right skill set of experience, we might subtract a little bit from what we would expect for our salary. And then the final number to consider is risk factor dollars. Risk factor dollars are the amount that we would add to our salary expectation based on any risks that we see with the position. So at an extreme example, think about professional athletes. People ask all the time, like, why do professional athletes make millions of dollars? And the answer to that question is actually very complicated, but a part of the answer to that question is that professional athletes make millions of dollars because it's a high risk job. If a professional athlete were to be injured, which let's face it could happen at any stage in their career, then they are done with their career. And so the money that they made as a part of that contract is, in theory, all of the money they have to sustain them for the rest of their lives. So somebody who's injured on the football field at 27, in theory, needs to take that $17 million contract or whatever it is to continue to live for the rest of their lives. That's risk factor dollars. A more realistic way to think about risk factor dollars is to think about maybe working a job that offers commission. So when you work at a job that offers commission, you know that it can be pretty risky because there's lots of factors out of your control. You don't have any control over the economy, for example. And so you may negotiate for a slightly higher base salary, the money you're going to be paid whether you make your commission or not, because you know that entering a commission-based position is risky. Other risk factors that people need to consider, perhaps you're moving all the way across the country, or maybe you're working for a startup and there's no guarantee that the organization is going to remain in business. These are the types of situations that we may add some additional risk factor dollars into our salary equation. The final thing that's listed as a part of this equation is bennies and perks, and that is benefits and perks. And we will talk a little bit about benefits and perks here in a little bit, but essentially those are the other things like health insurance, for example, that are rolled into your package that are not necessarily a part of your salary, but they may have some individual bearing on what sort of a salary you would accept. So, before we go into the negotiation, these are the things we need to know. We need to know essentially what our worth is in the market, and we need to have an ideal salary number in mind, a satisfactory salary number in mind, and then a no-go salary number in mind. Once we have those three numbers prepared, then we are really ready to begin to think about salary negotiation. And people ask me all the time, when is the right time to negotiate a salary? And in general, the right time to negotiate a salary is when somebody has offered you the job. So when they call you up and they say, hey, we're so excited, we really want you to work for our company, we want to pay you $52,000 a year. That is the right time to negotiate a salary. However, oftentimes as we go through the interviewing process, the human resources representative or an employer will try to force us into having a salary conversation before they make the job offer. And so I want to talk about a couple of those situations. First of all, why do we wait? Why is it best to wait to have the salary conversation until later on in the process? It all has to do with employer attitude. As people go through the decision-making process, they typically encounter three stages, which we call budget, fudget, and judge it. So I want to provide a metaphor here for you. So say that you are getting ready to go buy a car, and you know that you need a reliable car that gets good gas mileage, and you have decided that you have $12,000 to $15,000 to spend to buy this car. So when you first go to the car dealership, you're in what's called the budget stage. You know what you want, you need a car, you need it to be reliable, you need it to get good gas mileage, and you need to spend no more than $15,000. So this is where an employer typically is when they post an available position. They had somebody quit or they had a position come open. They know that they used to pay that person $42,000 a year. That's average pay for that position. So they're getting ready to bring somebody in. They want somebody good, they want somebody reliable, and they have $42,000 a year to do it. That is the budget stage. So you go to the car dealership and you're looking around, and the salesperson approaches you and says, "Hi, can I help you?" And you say, "Yes, I'm looking for a commuter car. I need something reliable that gets good gas mileage." And the salesperson says, "Oh, well, have you seen the Mercedes C300?" And you say, "Well, no, I haven't seen the Mercedes C300." And so the car dealer shows you the Mercedes C300, and it is so pretty, and it's reliable, and it gets good gas mileage. The only problem is it's slightly outside of the $15,000 that you wanted to spend. Well, then your mind enters what's called the fudget stage. And you're like, well, I know I said I wanted to spend $15,000, but with the good gas mileage, I'd be saving a lot of money on gas. And this car is very safe, so my insurance might go down. And I just got a raise, so maybe I could afford a little bit more. And what you're doing in your mind when you see something you like is that you are fudging it. And so if we think about going into the interview process, when you entered that interview process, the employer may have had in mind, okay, $42,000, that's what we can pay this person. And then they're starting to talk to you and they're starting to like you and they see that you're really, really pretty, right? You're the best Mercedes on the lot. And then they're thinking, you know what? $42,000 is what we typically pay, but we're really seeing the value in this candidate. So I bet we could be a little bit more flexible. That's the fudget stage. So then the dealer says to you, "Hey, do you want to take this car for a spin?" And you say, "Oh, yeah, I definitely want to take this car for a spin." And so you go out and you take the Mercedes on the highway and you drive through the neighborhoods, and it's the most gorgeous, luxurious, wonderful car that you've ever seen. And it has super fancy screens and robots, and it's all automized. And you get back to the dealership and you think, you know what? I don't care what it costs. I have to have this car. I will not be happy unless I leave the lot with any other car but this car. That's the judge it stage. You've taken everything into consideration. You've tried out the vehicle and you're like, I have to have this now. That's the phase that ideally an employer is when they make you a job offer. They've seen all the other candidates. They've talked to everybody. They've met with you 2, maybe 3 times, and they're like, you know what? We have to have this candidate. And I know that we thought we had $42,000, but what we really need is this person, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get this person to accept the job. That's the judge it stage. But people don't enter that judge it stage. They don't enter that place of flexibility until they've gotten to know you. So, how this relates to the timing. If you are in your first interview with the human resources person, they're probably still in the budget phase. They know what they want the position to pay. And so they may ask you, what would you expect a job in this position to pay? And so what you first want to do is you want to try to deflect, because ideally you wouldn't have this conversation at this point. And so you would say something like, "Gosh, that's a really good question. I've done lots of research on your company. I understand that you pay very fair wages, and I'd be interested in having this conversation when we've both decided I'm the right fit." Now, sometimes we can try to deflect, but we'll still be pressured into an answer anyway. So if after you try to deflect, you're still pressured into giving an answer, at this point what you would want to do is you would want to be prepared to state a range of salaries. So you would want to choose a number that's definitely higher than your no-go, but maybe slightly lower than your satisfactory number, and a number that's somewhere close to your ideal number. And so you may say at this stage, well, my salary expectations for this type of a position based on my research would be between $38,000 and $52,000 a year. Okay, if you're asked early on in the process when the employer is still in the budget phase, then you want to make sure that you're providing a very broad range. If you are asked later on in the process, so maybe now you're having your second or your third interview with the company and you can tell that they're really getting serious about having you be a part of this organization. If you're asked salary information at that point in time, you still want to try to deflect. Because again, in a best case scenario, you're not having this conversation until you're made the job offer. So you would say, wow, I'm really flattered that you're beginning to think about bringing me on board. I'd be really excited to work for this company. Let's wait until we've both decided that I'm for sure the right fit, and then I'm happy to talk salary. But again, you might still be pressured into giving an answer. At that point, if the employer is more into the fudget stage of their decision making, then you would want to be able to be prepared with a number. So the number that you want to give them should be between your ideal and your satisfactory number. It should probably lean a little bit higher towards a satisfactory number, but not be outrageous or unrealistic. And so in this case, you might say, I would expect a position like this to pay around $50,000. And then you've given them a number that they can work with. Either way, you always want to make sure that you're ensuring the employer of your interest.